Mahone Bay contains roughly 360 islands. Most of them are trees and rock and nothing else. One of them is 140 acres, privately owned, and has been dug up more or less continuously for 231 years. This is not a video about the money pit. It is about the swamp beside it. A triangle of black peat that almost nobody bothered with for 2 centuries. Then they drained it. Under the peat was a paved surface 460 feet long, laid on timber cribbing, a rectangular chamber of handmade brick and cut slate, buried and completely empty. Pieces of a leather boot with hobnail holes instead of stitching, which a lab dated to the 12th century. Stick with us until number 1, because the most solid piece of science to come out of that bog says something nobody expected. The swamp itself is younger than the mystery it is supposed to be hiding. If you like deep dives into the places history only half explained, hit subscribe. We post one of these every week. Today, we are counting down 10 things found in Oak Island's swamp. Let's go. Number 10. The George Washington Funeral Medal. The wrong kind of old. Every treasure hunt has a find that quietly ruins the mood. This is that find. In Season 13, Episode 16, a medal came out of the swamp on Lot 12. It was struck to mourn George Washington, who died in December 1799. Mourning medals like it were mass-produced through 1800. The island's artifact catalog rates the identification high confidence, which on Oak Island is genuinely unusual. Here is the problem. The island was surveyed into 32 4-acre lots in 1762. Settlers from Massachusetts had been arriving since 1761. British occupation runs from the 1760s onward. People lived on this island. They farmed it, they walked across it in ordinary boots on ordinary days, and they dropped things, the way people always have. An 1800 mourning medal is precisely what an ordinary occupied island produces. And 1800 is 5 years after the money pit was supposedly discovered in 1795. So the medal is not contemporary with whoever buried anything. It is contemporary with the men who came to dig it up. The swamp sits inside the licensed search area today. Public access is by scheduled tour only, along a causeway, a gravel track, and then the edge of a boardwalk where the ground stops being solid. Of the hundreds of objects that swamp has surrendered, this is one of a small handful anyone is actually confident about. And it is the one find that supports no theory whatsoever. Number 9. The Spanish copper coin. Someone was here in 1652. A Spanish 8 maravedis copper piece, struck in 1652, came out of the peat. The island was not surveyed into lots until 1762. That is 110 years later. It is not the only one. An 11 maravedis coin dated 1598 was recovered from Smith's Cove back in 1965. Wikipedia records a 17th century Spanish copper among the island's finds. Sky History records a copper coin from the swamp that specialists assessed as 17th century. And when the island's own researchers mapped where things turn up, the Spanish-era coins clustered in 2 places, the swamp and Isaac's Point. That clustering is the interesting part. It suggests different groups used different corners of the island at different times. But a coin is weak evidence, and it is weak for a reason that has nothing to do with Oak Island. Copper coins of this denomination circulated across the entire Spanish Atlantic world. They were the loose change of an ocean. A coin can reach a bog in 100 ordinary ways. Dropped by a visitor, carried ashore in ballast, lost by a fisherman, left by a searcher a century after the fact. What a single coin cannot do, on its own, is prove that anything was ever deposited. The show frames it as a Spanish galleon clue. The coin itself proves that a Spanish coin ended up in Nova Scotia mud. It is held in the island's artifact collection now, and some of these finds are displayed at the museum. You can stand and look at it through glass. 370 years old, and the most honest thing anyone can say about it is that somebody, at some point, was standing here. Number 8. The 8-sided survey stakes. The line someone drew. Fred Nolan arrived on Oak Island in 1958 as a land surveyor, and he was not welcome. Locked out of the main treasure hunt, He did something nobody else had thought to do. He went to the registry office in Chester and read the paperwork. What he found was that several lots were not owned by the man everyone assumed owned them. He bought 7 of them for $2,500, and most of them ringed the swamp. That purchase started a feud that lasted the rest of his life. It also gave him roughly 50 years alone with a bog nobody else wanted, and he came out of those 50 years convinced of one thing. The swamp was built, not formed, built. In 1969, he drained it, and among what surfaced were wooden stakes, cut with flat faces along their length. Nolan died in 2016. 2 years later, a different team drained the same swamp again. In the northern section, following a cobblestone pathway, they began pulling up wooden survey stakes cut with 8 sides. More came up in Season 13, near the brick and slate structure. During Season 7, one surfaced bearing 6 cuts, matching the examples Nolan had recorded half a century earlier. 2 men, 50 years apart, in the same mud, finding the same hand-cut markers along the same line. There is an obvious skeptical answer here, which is that Nolan put them there himself during his own work. But Nolan's son, standing in that swamp on camera, said his father did not have the means to build anything on this scale. Excavation along the stake line continued through Season 13. The trench walls are cut black peat, the tree line hisses in the wind, and the machinery idles while somebody kneels down to look. A man spent 5 decades insisting that swamp was made by human hands and died before anyone took him seriously enough to empty it out and check. Number 7. The hand cannon barrel, the weapon that should not be here. It came out of the western swamp looking like scrap. A corroded iron tube near the stone road feature on Lot 12, the sort of object that gets photographed and forgotten. Then it went through 4 people, and each of them narrowed it. Metal detectorist Gary Drayton, who found it, suggested a Petronel, an early muzzle-loading firearm. Archaeologist Laird Niven proposed something older still. A hand cannon, one of the earliest firearms Europe had, in use from the 1200s to the early 1500s. To settle it, they put the tube through a CT scanner. The scan found a touch hole. That is the small aperture where a flame or a slow match is introduced to ignite the powder charge. A plain tube does not have one. A ferrule does not have one. A gun does. Archaeometallurgist Emma Culligan analyzed the metal and found the mineral content clean, which placed it at the 1700s or older and confirmed European manufacture. Maltese military historian Matthew Balzan assessed it as European military hardware, potentially dating to the 1200s. And then Balzan raised a second possibility, which is the one worth sitting with. He suggested the barrel may have been repurposed, not fired at anyone, packed with powder and used to direct a charge into rock, to fracture it, a technique that would predate conventional blasting by centuries. If that reading is correct, the object stops being evidence of a fight and becomes evidence of a job. Someone was not defending the swamp. Someone was breaking stone in it. A separate find supports the first reading instead. While tracing the stone pathway, the team recovered pieces of an English cannon that had been destroyed in an explosion. The barrel is in the island's collection now. The identification chain is detailed, and the people in it are credentialed. But it is worth saying plainly that the 1200s date is expert opinion on typology. It is not a laboratory result. Still, a CT scan of a lump of swamp iron found the hole where the match went in, on an island where nobody is supposed to have been until 1762. Number 6. The Square Swamp Vault, the empty room. They found a sealed chamber buried in the bog, opened it, and there was nothing inside. It surfaced in Season 12, Episode 9. Alex Legina picked a brick out of the spoil. Billy Gerhardt, working the excavator, spotted cut slate. What emerged over the following episodes was a rectangular structure of handmade brick and cut slate in the northern swamp, roughly 50 yards along the cobblestone pathway that runs toward the eye of the swamp. Dr. Ian Spooner identified the bricks as handmade, which means pre-industrial manufacture. The slate had been cut, not gathered. The obvious explanation is domestic. Old wells and cisterns turn up on farmed islands all the time, and Oak Island was farmed. But the shape does not cooperate. 2 wells were recorded on the neighboring Anthony Graves property, and both of them are round. Every known domestic water feature in this area is round. This one is square. Laird Niven, the site archaeologist, said he had never seen a slate and brick structure like it on the island. Tom Nolan, whose father spent 5 decades in this exact swamp, said the same thing. Those are the 2 men on Earth with the deepest personal knowledge of this ground, and they both looked at it and said they had never encountered anything like it. The island's catalog dates it to the late 1600s, though that figure has no published laboratory basis behind it, and the entire account of this feature runs through a single source connected to the production. That caveat matters. What is not in dispute is what was inside. They excavated it. It was empty. The feature was revisited across seasons 12 and 13, and digging continued along its alignment, hunting for whatever else might sit on the same line. The northern swamp refloods quickly, so pumps run the entire time anybody is standing in it. Someone hauled brick and cut slate into a bog, built a square room where every other structure for miles is round, and buried it. And then, apparently, took out whatever it held. If you are finding this interesting, drop a thumbs up. It genuinely helps these get seen. And tell us in the comments which of these finds you think has the most innocent explanation, because half of them probably do. We read every one. We are halfway through. The second half is where the dates stop making sense. Number 5. The eye of the swamp. The circle nothing will grow on. Here is the detail that stops people cold. There is an oval patch of open water at the northern apex of that triangle, and vegetation has not crossed into it in aerial photographs going back to the 1920s. That is 100 years of plants refusing to close a gap. It matters because of how wetlands behave. Swamps colonize open water fast. Reeds push in from the margins, peat builds, and a small pond will close itself within decades. Left alone, this one should have vanished generations ago. It did not. Spooner was brought onto the island in 2019 to answer a narrow question: is this bog natural? While his team was coring the swamp, they began probing the northern pond, and they kept striking rock. Not scattered rock. Rock around the perimeter of the oval, forming what appears to be a circular stone formation, tracing the exact shape of the thing above it. His conclusion was that human intervention is the most likely explanation. Something down there is holding the shape. In Season 7, Episode 13, a pickaxe head was recovered at the eye of the swamp. That is a tool for breaking ground, found at a feature that looks like ground that was broken. One idea floated on the show is that the eye is an old clay pit, a working quarry, with the paved area beside it serving as the haul road out. That would explain the ring of stone, the pickaxe, and the road in one unremarkable stroke. It is a hypothesis, not a finding, and nobody has demonstrated it. The eye is still there, still named, still an active target. It is best seen from the air. On the ground, it is dark open water inside dense reed, and the way you investigate it is waders, a probe rod, and slow steps, listening for the moment the rod stops going down. Frogs, wind, and then the small hard knock of metal on stone. A century of aerial photography, and the plants still will not cross that line. Number 4. The stone wharf and the 460-foot road. The road under the bog. They drained the swamp to test a dead man's theory, and what came up out of the peat was a surface, not a scatter of stone. A graded run of cobble with structure underneath it, sitting above the glacial till, and, this is Spooner's observation, lacking the clay coating you would expect if those rocks had been laid down by the natural layer. His assessment was that the concentration of rock there was not produced by natural processes. Surveyor Steve Guptill traced its length at roughly 460 feet. Beneath it was timber cribbing. That is the tell, and it is worth explaining because it is the single most persuasive detail in this entire story. Cribbing is a lattice of timber laid down to spread load across ground that cannot carry it. You do not build it for a footpath. You build it when you intend to drag serious weight across something that will otherwise swallow it. An ox shoe was recovered from the cobblestone path. At one end sits a stone wharf, unearthed in Season 8 and assessed as at least 300 years old. A wharf, in the middle of a bog. Pieces of a wooden cargo barrel were recovered at the feature. Wood that Spooner pulled from just below the stone pavement returned a radiocarbon date in the 13th century. History.com records a massive stone feature dated to 1200 AD, uncovered after the swamp was drained. And then the surveyors ran the heading. It leaves the swamp, climbs into the uplands, and points toward the money pit. Now the counter-argument, because it is a serious one, and it deserves airtime. The archaeology blog Archaeothoughts has argued that this road skirts the tree line and follows the contours of the island, and that it closely resembles ordinary cobble shoreline of the kind found all along Nova Scotia's south shore. In other words, it may not be a road at all. It may be the original beach of one drumlin, from before the swamp filled in and joined the two halves of the island into one. The same source notes that Fred Nolan built a stone platform out into that swamp to bring in a coring rig, and that it is visible in old aerial photographs. Sections of the pathway and the wharf are still exposed, still under excavation, and still refilling with water every time a storm comes up the coast. Somebody either built a load-bearing road through a swamp, or the sea did it by accident, and everyone has been arguing about a beach for 6 years. Number 3. The leather shoe fragments. Somebody walked here in 1200. They were following the line of stakes north, the same alignment that had led them to the empty brick chamber the year before, when Gary Drayton spotted leather in the spoil. Then, a second piece. It had come from deep in the Black Peat, in the northern swamp on Lot 13. The construction is what made it worth testing. The fragments carry hobnail holes rather than stitching, the hobnail method being consistent with older European footwear and not the way shoes were being made in colonial North America. Drayton noted the elongated shape of one piece as characteristic of an early design. Similar boot leather turned up in the southern swamp in the same episode. The samples went to Beta Analytical. In the war room, Craig Tester read out the result. The primary date range was 1148 to 1216 AD. Some readings extended back as far as 1047. That is a potential 800 years, in a bog on an island where the documented story starts in 1795. The team connected it immediately to every other 13th century date on the island. And then Tester, who is the engineer in the room, did the thing that engineers do. He said, wait. He noted that Beta Analytical had been asked to run additional cleaning methods and retest the samples to confirm the result. The island's own catalog rates this find medium confidence, not high. As of this research, no confirmed retest has been published. There is a second caution, and the show's own reporting states it plainly, which is more than most coverage manages. A carbon date is a terminus postquem with an uncertainty band. It does not say the boot was dropped in 1216. It says the animal whose hide became that leather was alive somewhere between roughly 1148 and 1216. Leather can be worn for decades. It can be traded, reused, carried across an ocean, cut down and stitched into something else. The date is a floor, not an event. But a floor is still a floor, and a hobnailed European boot sole, sitting deep in peat beside a cobblestone path lined with hand-cut stakes, is not the sort of thing that arrives by accident. The fragments are in the island collection. The trench they came out of fills with water as fast as it is cut, and the pumps run the entire time anyone is standing in it. During that same excavation, the machine bucket dropped roughly 5 feet into a void, surrounded by solid ground, and another octagonal stake came up in the spoil. Everyone remembers the number. Almost nobody remembers that the man who read it out immediately asked for it to be checked again. Number 2. The ship that wasn't there. 660 AD. At the end of Season 6, a seismic survey of the swamp returned a shape. A long mass, buried in the center of the bog, with curved edges. Whatever else it was the outline everybody had been hoping for, because the sunken ship idea is the oldest live theory about this swamp, and it belongs to Fred Nolan. His argument, held for decades, was that a vessel had been deliberately sunk or hidden there, and that the swamp itself was created to cover it. Seismic imaging appeared to hand him the proof. The following season, in Season 7, Episode 2, they cored straight through it. The cores came back with no wood, no timber, no fastenings, no evidence of a vessel of any kind. What Spooner observed instead was a high concentration of clay, which he noted is characteristic of marine environments, the signature of a seabed, not a shipwreck. That should have closed the question. Then, 2 seasons later, digging near the southern border of the Triangle Swamp, they pulled a piece of wooden ship's railing out of the mud. It was carbon dated to 660 to 770 AD. That made it the oldest artifact ever recovered from Oak Island. Not the oldest in the swamp, the oldest anywhere on the island, from any dig, in 231 years of searching. Sit with the arithmetic for a second. That railing was cut from a tree more than 1,000 years before 3 teenagers supposedly found a depression in the ground in 1795. It predates the Norman conquest of England by 3 centuries. It sits in a period when the only people documented crossing the North Atlantic at all were Norse. Iron marlin spikes have also come out of that swamp, tools used for rope work and rope repair aboard ship, and the first iron artifacts ever recovered from the bog. The island's catalog lists wooden ship components from the swamp dated as early as the 8th century. So the record now holds 2 facts that flatly refuse to sit together. The anomaly that looked exactly like a ship contained no ship, and the swamp that contained no ship keeps producing pieces of one. The anomaly zone has been excavated repeatedly since. No hull has ever been recovered. The date on the railing is an extreme outlier, and even the researchers most sympathetic to an early contact reading call it speculative on the strength of 1 or 2 objects. Which leaves the honest position. The imaging promised a ship and delivered clay, and then the mud handed over a fragment of railing that nobody has been able to explain since. Number 1. The swamp itself. The bog is younger than the legend. You cross a causeway 200 meters long, built in 1965, so machinery could reach the island, and the road runs up onto a low forested hill. Then it goes down. The ground stops being ground. You are walking into a saddle between 2 hills, and what fills it is a triangle of black peat and reed, and every step gives a little under the weight of you. On this coast, the fog can sit for as many as 90 days a year, and when it does, the hills on either side disappear, and there is only the flat, dark middle of the thing. There is wind coming off Mahone Bay. There are pumps running somewhere, and when a probe rod is pulled back out of the peat, it lets go, with a sound like a swallow. Nothing about it looks like a treasure site. It looks like a wet place between 2 hills. That is exactly what it is, and that is the finding. Ian Spooner turned this show down the first time it asked him. He is a full professor of Earth and Environmental Science at Acadia University, director of research at the K.C. Irving Environmental Science Center, with a doctorate from the University of Calgary and more than 70 peer-reviewed papers behind him. None of those papers are about Oak Island. He came in 2019 as a consultant to the production because, by his own account, this was a place where the science and the story had been stirred together. His job was narrow: date the wetland. The cores said it is not ancient. The sediment ran high in clay and short on organic material, far less of the slow vegetable buildup 1,000-year wetland leaves behind. His assessment was that this is a young wetland, perhaps only 300 to 400 years old. He has stated the triangular swamp was once a cove, and core analysis showed a significant saltwater intrusion as recently as the late 1300s or early 1400s. The sea came into this place around the year 1400. Now hold that against the geology. Oak Island is 4 drumlins, 4 hills left behind by glaciers, sitting on till, over limestone, gypsum, and slate. The swamp fills the low ground where those hills meet, and the wider bay was a lagoon 8,000 years ago, before rising sea levels drowned it. If that gap was open saltwater within the last 700 years, then Oak Island was not 1 island. It was 2, and the swamp is the seam where they closed, which reframes everything above it in this list. The road, the wharf, the stone ring, the square brick room. The island's own researchers put it plainly. The swamp may have formed around and above structures that were already standing there. Nobody built a bog to hide a road. A cove silted up and buried one. And here is the caveat that almost never survives into a thumbnail. Spooner said the intrusion was likely the result of human manipulation, and then said he could not rule out a single enormous storm. The swamp is still there, inside the licensed search area, drained and excavated and refilled again since 2018. You can only see it on a scheduled tour. 231 years of digging for something buried in the ground, and the best supported discovery anyone has made is that the ground showed up late. Nova Scotia's South Shore is full of places where the evidence is real and the explanation is missing, and Oak Island is only the loudest of them. For me, it is number 1, a bog that turned out to be a drowned cove, quietly making a fool of every map of that island ever drawn. Which of these finds do you think has an ordinary explanation nobody has bothered to check? Tell us in the comments. And if this is the kind of history you came for, subscribe.